Well, hey there, Larry. How are you tonight?
Doing great, Andy. How are you?
Well, it's two swinging dudes out here. I guess swinging's not the right way to word that. Two dudes partying on a Saturday night, and we get to record a podcast. That's how exciting our lives are.
Well, I'd say it's kind of boring, but I'm old, so what do you expect?
Right. So there was dirt, and then there was you, or were you at the patent office when dirt came in to register?
We patented dirt in my life.
Okay, that's pretty awesome. This show is supported by our patrons, and so very much want to thank our newest patron, Christian. I think that's what it is. You are the best, and thank you very much for coming in at the hustler level. And before we get any further, I wanted to go back and recognize all of our patrons who help support the show. And not that the show's about money, but it just shows that you care about what we're doing. And, there is a whole bunch of expenditures with microphones and equipment and stuff, but wanted to send out a special thank you to all of those people. So we have Thomas, Michael, Justin, Horace, Dave, Hank.
And we have more. We have Jane, Anonymous, Travis, Michael, Patty, and Jennifer.
Thank you guys so very much. It was really, really special that you guys reach out and support us that way. And my request for getting YouTube subscribers has been going great. We're about halfway there. I just looked a few minutes ago and trying to get to 100. And as of right now, we're at 50. So that's really awesome and really appreciate it. If you have a second Google account, you can go register over there if you want to. And that would be great to go along with that.
Now, remind our people, what does this do for us? I remember, but I just want to make sure that new listeners know what it does.
Well, it does just slightly above nothing. But if you look at the URL that I published in the show notes last week, the URL is youtube.com/some long length of garbage. And I want youtube.com/registry matters. You can go to patreon.com/registry matters. You can go to our website, registrymatters.co. So everything is branded around that name. And I would like to have youtube.com/registry matters. And to get there, you need 100 subscriptions before they'll open up the option for you to do it. That's it.
And that makes it a whole lot easier for us in terms of people finding us.
Yeah.
And the name is so the pointer to our show is easy to follow if it's Registry Matters versus all that gibberish.
Yes, it is more to me. It's more of a cosmetic thing. I'm not using the YouTube channel for anything other than YouTube is literally the second largest search engine, and I would want something that is somewhat memorable for people to share. It is just a place I post the podcast. I throw in a static image of a video, and I release the podcast up there just to get more search engine juice, so to speak. So somebody out in Minnesota, whatever, doesn't know anything about us or the production, and they happen to type in sex offender podcast. Maybe we show up in YouTube. Maybe it adds extra juice into getting back to the website.
Well, fantastic.
Complicated SEO stuff.
Glad we're halfway there.
Yeah. So, another week or maybe two, and I suspect we'll get there. Well, let's kick this off, and we have a this is where I want some of those like intro things, because this is just a crappy person. And Little Rock police staffer implies in all staff emails, sex offenders should be shot. This is coming from KARK out of KARK.com out of Arkansas. And so that's just super good fun that she just thinks that everyone convicted of a sexual offense. And Larry, I'm often reminded when I read something like this to go back to the Narsau call from roughly 2 months ago, where the lady from Virginia who didn't report that her kid was having sex, she's on the registry. Well, I just think about someone like that.
Well, I started looking at this prior to the show and didn't complete it, but I saw enough that it was very troubling that a police staffer, now luckily, fortunately, doesn't say police officer, so the staffers may have less protection than the officers have with their union in terms of termination, but hopefully the staffer is removed. And obviously, when you would say something like that, you have no clue about who else on the registry, and of course, no one should be shot because that's not what we do in America. But for a person to say that in an email communicating to police officers, to the entire department, really? Little Rock Police?
Do you want me to play the clip? I can play the segment.
If it's not too long, but yeah,
it's a couple minutes.
Rather revolting.
Okay,
so
let's go.
Let's hear it.
Afternoon by a secretary to hundreds of police employees, including officers. KRK4's Mitch McCoy got his hands on the email. He has a copy of it in the studio tonight. Mitch?
Yeah, Bob and Ashley, good evening. Sources tell me the woman, a secretary at the 12th Street Police substation, sent the email to the entire police department. It appears the email stems from confusion about where calls concerning sex offenders should be transferred to. Living the retired life, Elaine Potter says nothing surprises her nowadays. She says an email sent by a Little Rock police staffer is out of line.
That's not her place. She needs to be fired. You don't do that.
At 3:26 Thursday afternoon, this email allegedly sent by a secretary whose name we are not releasing says, quote, sex offender calls belong to major crimes. I work on the patrol side of 12th Street Station. My answer for those is shoot them. Then says her boss may not appreciate that.
You don't shoot people for things that you don't believe in. And yes, they are bad people. You don't want them in your neighborhood. You want them away from your children, but you don't have the right to shoot them.
It appears the secretary sent the email because phone calls concerning sex offenders kept being incorrectly transferred to her.
We're all wrong sometimes.
Kayla Esmond says this secretary, who sources tell me has been with the department for years, should not be fired.
It's not like she's one of our patrol officers or the police chief or a sheriff. I think being talked to by a superior and being reprimanded in a way that doesn't erase an entire career is probably more appropriate.
Police Chief Kenton Buckner quickly followed up to the secretary's all-staff email by calling the note highly inappropriate and under current investigation.
And I know you could probably get very angry working in that environment all the time and hearing about all the bad things day in and day out, but still.
It's important to note the secretary is not a sworn officer. It is unclear what kind of disciplinary action, if any, could be taken by the police department. That entire email is on our website right now. Back to you.
That's freaking awesome. You know, one thing that I wanted to bring up about that is if we collectively supported her firing, then we are kind of just as guilty because everyone throws us under the bus because we made a mistake and they say that everything should happen to them. They're dangerous people. We shouldn't flip that over and say just because she made a bad statement that she should be thrown under the bus too.
Well, you make a valid point. I think that the person in the comment there that a whole career should not be erased. I just wish that they would hold that same standard up to the other people who make a mistake.
Correct.
It's kind of the thing I pontificated about the cops. When one of theirs gets charged with a crime, you will always hear them say, well, you're only hearing, all you saw was that video of the guy being shot in the back with him crawling backwards on his hands. And there's a whole lot more of the story you're not seeing. Keep your mind open. Duncan Hunter's saying, the congressman in California that's being accused of diverting tens of thousands of dollars from his campaign, he's saying keep an open mind. I actually agree with you. But why don't you keep an open mind? I'd like for the police to charge someone with a crime, and I'd like for a high-ranking police official to say, we have filed our charges, we believe in our case, but this person's entitled to a presumption of innocence, and that presumption follows all the way through the process until they're found guilty beyond reasonable doubt. They never say that, but they ask us to do that, and this is on behalf of a police staffer. They're asking that not to erase their entire career. I'll buy in, but I'd like you to buy in also. I'd like you to buy in when it's a mistake by someone else. Why are people being penalized for their mistakes 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years afterwards?
Yep, absolutely. We need to double back. I forgot to, we're going to play a listener phoned in just a couple hours ago and just get some feedback on the voicemail. Here's Gary.
Yeah, this is Gary. I called once before and here's some information on my case down here in Louisiana. And they took ongoing defense for prescription period in layman terms, the statute of limitations. And they got me registered in East Baton Rouge Parish. I went and pulled my worksheet. They forged forms against me that I registered over there. And I got to go to court in the 19th Judicial District in Baton Rouge. And they don't know I got my worksheet, which is ironclad. These people just literally falsified information on me. I'm going to beat it because I got the hard evidence, which is ironclad. My boss had abrogated those materials he pulled my worksheet up. I punched in a 7, punched out a 5. And the parole office also falsified a form that they notified me on the same day, January 4th, 1996. And I can't be at 3 places at one time. I
Really?
never punched out. I couldn't have been a parole officer. She falsified a form.
Do you think someone can be multiple places at the same time?
I don't see any problem with it whatsoever. Keep going, but yeah, I've routinely been 3 places at the same time.
And I can't be at 3 places at one time. I never punched out. I couldn't have been a parole officer. She falsified a form too. I never even met this lady. She was supposed to be my parole agent. And she wanted to know where I was living. I was living in a bad part of town. She didn't want to come over there. She assigned me another agent. Somebody went in that parole office and tampered with the evidence. She was supposed to be my agent, but she found out where I was living and signed me another agent. But they got my signature and her signature. I think it's going to be a big thing down here in Louisiana. But you can call me back. I can give you a lot more information. My number is 51651. My name's Gary, and I'll talk to you if you call. Have a nice day.
So can you say Louisiana the way that he said it?
I'm not sure I can, but I feel bad for the guy if there's a falsification of stuff taking place. And I've never been one of those that believes America's so pure as the wind, driven snow that things like that can't happen. Unfortunately, I don't think that we're really in a position to be of any help to him, other than saying we wish the best. But if they're charging him with violating the registry, Louisiana is very tough on that in terms of the penalties, and hopefully he's got a competent attorney and they really do have solid evidence. But I don't know that calling him would be of any benefit, because neither of us are licensed to practice law and don't really have any way of being helpful. But if he's being framed, that's awful.
Is there any reason that we would point him to the attorney we know over that way?
Well, he wouldn't be able to, because he's in Calcasieu Parish, and this guy's in Baton Rouge Parish. I mean, other than
East Baton Rouge Parish.
Yeah, the East Baton Rouge. Is there a difference in the two? Probably
I would
so.
suspect.
That's why I said, but
I haven't lived there in a long time. The other thing, I mean, we're only taking his side of it, and I'm developing my theory here, your side of the argument of like fair treatment and statute of limitations. But we're only hearing his side, and he says that he can't be in 3 places at the same time. I can totally see that a woman wouldn't want to go to the bad part of town to go supervise him, but what would be her motivation to trump up charges saying that he is not where he's supposed to be?
Well, you can have, it's unclear from the information he gave, but you can have a registration obligation in multiple counties if you have connections to them.
Right.
You could be working in one and living in another, and then they have this horrendous requirement that you register in both, and it could be he may have been out of compliance. It's designed about I got you, and we've talked about that 2 episodes back, I believe, about the number of people in Pennsylvania versus the number of sex offenses. The technical violations of the registry people get charged with far exceed the number of sex offenses, and it may be that this is a legitimate technical violation. But he says statute of limitations, and that confuses me, because I don't know what the issue is. If you're non-compliant with the registry, I don't know what the statute of limitations come. That's a generally continuing offense until you come into compliance. Right. You can't. Wouldn't it be great if you could? The statute of limitations in my state for which the registry violating is a 4th degree felony, and you would have I believe that's a 5-year statute of limitations. But so if you could avoid detection for 5 years, they couldn't prosecute you. Well, but they cure that by it being a continuing offense. It's
every day that you're not in compliance is still 5 years into the future.
Yes,
it's a moving target as you go through.
Yes, it's a continuing offense and the statute of limitations. Now, an attorney who presented a theory, and we're going off script on this, but he presented a theory to me that a person could thumb their nose and say, I'm not going to comply since a 4th degree felony. You max the person out, give them their 18 months, which is all the 4th degree carries here. So they max them out and they serve their 9 months. And then the person comes out and says, screw you, you've maxed me out. I've served the maximum amount of time. You can't do anything else to me, and see what happens. I said, well, I can tell you what would happen. They would claim it's a continuing offense, and they would prosecute him again because he never did come into compliance. That's what they would do. But whether that would hold up or not, I don't know. A lot of questions in law we don't know the answer to until there's litigation.
Right, and you call that first appearance, first presence,
first impression.
First impression. That's it.
Yeah. No one has litigated in my state that they can serve their maximum sentence and then tell the registry to cram it. So we don't know. I doubt it would work, but it could certainly be. If you're willing to try it, I'm willing to put it forth as a theory.
Yeah, you've said that to me before. Of well, we don't know, so why don't you be the first one?
Well, I mean, if you don't mind serving, because on the second offense here it elevates to third degree, and they can give you up to 3 years, which is still relatively tame by national standards. That would get you a 1.5 years with a good time. But if you're wrong, the worst they could do is give you a 3-year max. That's all.
Yeah, I know, but we have talked about the bail system in that if you can't afford bail and you get jammed up for 90 days, 6 months, 12 months, just while you're waiting some kind of trial, and now you can't get out because of bond, you lose your house, you lose your car, you lose your job, etc. 3 years is certainly longer than a 3-month stint just in the county jail or whatever, but it's still 3 years. You're probably not going to have that job when you get out. And all the other things, what happens to all your personal effects?
That's the unfortunate reality of why a lot of people can't go to trial and find out things.
Right.
If you throw the dice and you're wrong, if they've offered you probation, at least there's hope of you staying in the community if you can comply with the rigid terms of probation.
Yeah. Well, this next article comes from Aussie.com, and this is why you should hire someone who went to prison. And, it's just kind of a happy, feel-good article that, and I've personally testified to people that I think having these things kind of behind you can be a leverage point, but you're not going to walk in there and ask for top dollars. You're not going to go in there and ask for top conditions necessarily. I mean, there should be some basic standard, but if you have a record, you are going to be looked down upon. But go in there and I'm not saying lowball the wages, but you have those kind of things that you could use. You have a hunger, you're trying to get out there, you've been turned down, so many doors closed. You can use those kinds of things to your advantage as talking points when you're trying to get a job.
So far, so good.
Well, like I said, so it's a happy joy kind of article, and it provides a whole bunch of different examples about people that have gone to prison, and when they get out, maybe the door is closed in their face. Excluding formerly incarcerated job seekers from the workforce cost the U.S. up to $87 billion in lost GDP.
No. Is that a B that you're talking there? Make sure we got this right.
B as in boy, and not M as in man or monkey or malaria.
All right. I just want to make people hear the enormity of the amount of money.
And we've talked about that, not to go into like an economics conversation, but if you shoot these people down as far as earning money, you are totally kicking the can down the road of, well, how are they going to afford to live when they eventually, hopefully, hit Social Security age? Well, now they might not make enough, so they have to pull in from other resources. They're going to get sick. They're going to have to pull in, and now they're just going to go to the emergency room, which is the most inefficient form of care that you could get. There's this whole cascading list of things that's going to affect them tomorrow, next year, and on down the line. Why can't we see this as they're most are going to get out? Why can't we help get them back in to be as productive as they could possibly be to reach their potential?
Well, I mean, I can answer that, but it will be offensive because some people don't believe. I'm more of the what's good for the community is good for everybody. And Americans are generally wired that way.
Right.
We believe we made it ourselves.
Yes.
And we grow up that being instilled in us, that America's about the individual. And despite the fact that no individual can make it by themselves, that's drilled into you. So we don't grow up being drilled about the good of the community. the community is better off. The family of people is better off. If you've got 2,000 homeless people in a city of 200,000, you've got 1% of the people roaming the streets that their creativity is being sapped, their dignity is being sapped. They're using emergency services. They're doing things that are costing lots of money. They're prone to commit crimes. But we don't think about it like that, as we're better off if these people are actually being productive. And those who actually do believe we're better off being productive, they believe that they should make themselves productive, because the people believe that you made yourself productive. Very few people, I know diehard conservatives who have their kids in great public school systems around the country. And I'm not saying all public schools are. If you're in school in Gary, Indiana, you probably wouldn't think your public schools are great, or in Washington, D.C., and I get that. But we have some great public school systems in this country. And I'll tell them, okay, well, you look at your property taxes. You spent $674 in school taxes, and you've got 3 kids, and in your state, you actually spend about $9,000 a child. So you got $27,000 worth of benefit where you put in $600. So you didn't actually do that all yourself. But so where I'm meandering to on this is that until the American people realize it's to our benefit to have this huge underclass of convicted felons, and they had in the article here the number of people that have felony arrest records, it's astronomically high, beyond what even I realized.
It's 1/3, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what they said. It's just unbelievable that we would see it to our benefit to have these people in substandard conditions. And you point out about the receiving end of federal benefits. I gripe about the paying end. We have more money flowing into our coffers if these people are not working in poultry factories or holding a sign. If they're working, every time they increase their salary, we get a bigger cut, which is good for the public benefit side of things that you depend on, like your public schools, like your Medicare, which pays for your elderly parents' medical care, your military that has to be paid for, your infrastructure. All these things have to be paid for, or else we continue to put it on the credit card like we've done at an accelerating rate the last couple of years, and we charge it until the country can no longer borrow money, and we come crashing down. But it's to our benefit for these people to be reintegrated and to be forgiven. And that's what this thing is talking about. They even pointed out that Tyson Foods doesn't even run background checks. Did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, a person came out of prison and thought they would never get a job, and they're already moving up at the Tyson company without any regard to their past. Of course, some people won't think much of Tyson, but I give Tyson kudos for that.
Yeah, the focus of the article is a man named Lester, and he walked in each day with tenacity and a hunger to succeed. He stayed late when nobody else wanted to, and proved he could quickly learn to operate new machines. And they also mention about banning the box in a bunch of different states, which is really, I got to tell you, that's a BS. That's just a complete straw man to say, oh, well, we're not having you check whether you are, but there's still not Tyson, but most companies are still going to we want to do a background check to know what kind of person is working here. So you're still going to get denied later in the process. You just didn't get denied on the form when you filled it out. That
is correct. The ban the box keeps you in the running until they get a chance to have a face-to-face, because theoretically, if you get destroyed by the box, you never got a chance to sell yourself. If your resume and application is attractive enough and there's no box there, they can still ask you once they sit down to you. And of course, some people would cut you out of consideration at that point. But theoretically, it gets more people a chance for an in-person interview. And it's a step in the right direction.
On Twitter, somebody that I communicate with a lot, someone that we both know, his name's Guy, he said, and I might not have this completely accurate, but I think he said after 5 years, expungement of criminal records for everybody. And someone wrote back and said, well, what about murderers and rapists? And he said, did I stutter?
Well, I don't quite follow that. If there's 5 years after their conviction, 5 years after they've paid their debt, where do we measure the 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but the point that I'm really trying to make is, so he says after 5 years, you have your record expunged. But someone said, well, what about the worst of the worst? And Guy doubled back down and said, did I stutter? Just like it applies to everybody, that you should be able to outlive your past at some point.
Well, I would go along with him if it's a number of years after you've paid your debt to society. When you pay your debt, theoretically, your slate is clean when you walk out the gate. Maybe we should expunge them at that time after you paid your debt, if you don't have any more tail on you for probation or parole or anything where you owe part of your conviction. But America and the world, for that matter, with technology, and Europe is already having the discussion about your past.
Your right to be forgotten.
Right to be forgotten about your past, but we're not quite ready for that yet, apparently.
No.
But
one other point that I wanted to make, and hopefully it hasn't left my brain. What was I going to say? Crap! The thought left my brain. It came.
You got old timers.
I do. Crap! We got to go on. I will. It'll come back to me. Well, and then I'm not sure if we how much we should dig into this one, but from the Ohio State Journal, flawed system of background checks for prospective Idaho high school coaches is unreliable. In some case, why does it take so long for the police department to do any sort of criminal background check? But it became clear that a person that would have unsupervised access to kids might have a drug conviction, including murder, and here they are with unrestricted access to children. I just wanted to bring that up to get your thoughts on where should there be a line drawn on any crime against adults, minors, doesn't matter, in then being a mentor in that kind of learning environment.
I would hate to draw that line there. We've just been talking about people getting a second chance. I don't know where to draw the line. I don't know that we should turn a blind eye to it either. I mean, with this you have balancing interest between litigation. There's negligent hiring and people run to the attorneys looking for. I just was listening today about a verdict here. They were talking about on the talk show here about I believe it was $74 million verdict for a child that was born at a vaginal delivery, and that the child was very large, like 11.7 pounds, and the mother wanted a cesarean, and they destroyed the kid trying to get him through after he got stuck in the birth canal. And he's going to need lifetime care. And the jury awarded $74 million, that being excessive in the eyes of some people. But you've got people who want to give second chances are balancing between what's going to happen if there's an accusation and what's going to happen if there's misconduct. And I don't know how to answer all those questions, because we want forgiveness, but also if I'm on a board of directors of an entity where you're responsible for keeping the entity's interest within your scope of supervision, how do you balance those?
Here, I did just remember, and it is related. I did testify up at the state capitol once, and it was some sort of prison reform thing. And I think it was related to food stamps, of giving people convicted of drug offenses food stamps, for example. And the person that I spoke to, the local representative, he goes, well, why should that person that has obviously proven themselves to not be worthy, why should they essentially take money away from somebody else that actually needs it? And so, if I think it's often, you're climbing the corporate ladder, for example. And here we go. I'm going to get all kinds of hate mail. As a privileged white male, either we could say that we start at the lowest rung or the first step, or you could say you start midway up. But people that are in some sort of disability, they come with all this extra baggage of a conviction. People have all these racial biases and so forth. They don't start at the same place. You're trying to reach to the same destination necessarily, but you don't necessarily start at the same place. And now you're just adding extra weight to someone so they can't even eventually achieve the highest level of success. And it was like, well, that's just a poor way to look at it. I mean, you sent them to prison to do what? To rehabilitate. Oh, no, that's not really what it is. It's total punishment and shaming, and to pull you down to the lowest levels that you could possibly go to. It's not rehabilitation.
Unfortunately, you're right. There's the focus of American prisons is really very few are in the rehabilitation business anymore. There was a time in the liberal heyday in this country where we took that a little more seriously, but that's really not the focus of prisons.
So we spend all this money to put people behind bars and in these massive defense structures to teach them how to be the worst of the worst kind of people. They're hanging out with people with very corrupt mindsets, and you send someone in there that doesn't necessarily have those mindsets, but now they're exposed to those mindsets. I could give you all kinds of stories about the sex offender treatment class that I took. There were all kinds of subjects in there that I had never considered, and they brought them out. And not that they brought them out in me, but they brought them up in the class that, like, wow, I'd never really thought about playing that kind of game with my nephew in the closet. It's just very strange. And but how are they expecting people to come out of that and make your life productive from that?
But so you're missing the whole point. It's not like Americans really care about that.
Right.
If they were, why don't you go to a community forum of elected representatives? Pick whether you're liberal or conservative, just pick a group where there's citizens, and tell me if a hand goes up asking about corrections. It's the rarest of things. We're not concerned about good correctional policy. If a hand goes up, the only time the hand's going to go up, and I've been in political business for a long time, spanning over 3 decades. The hand goes up wanting to know how we can make these bastards suffer more.
Right.
Because we're tired of them being mollycoddled. And that is what the elected official is going to hear. Now, you could, if you were idealistic, you could flip your finger at the constituents and say, I don't give a good, about what you think. I'm going to be about good, solid public policy. But that doesn't win elections. And until you change your attitude, America, who represents you is not going to change their corrections is going to change when we demand that it become rehabilitative driven. And we're not demanding that. We're demanding more punishment. That's what makes us feel good. I can't tell you why Americans are so punitive. I can tell you that's the way they are, but I can't tell you why. It makes no sense that you'd want to spend billions and billions of dollars just to warehouse people so that you could make them suffer, so that they would come out and be a second-class citizen, and they would end up in criminal in the revolving door of justice again. To me, that makes no sense, but that's what we do.
And then let's move on. This is going to be the inmate outrage episode. U.S. inmates stage nationwide prison labor strike over modern slavery. This article comes out of The Guardian, and on the I think it was the 21st that they did this. It's just a handful of days ago. Maybe it was on Tuesday. That says on Tuesday, America's vast army of incarcerated men and women, at 2.3 million of them, they form the far the largest imprisoned population in the world, will brace itself for what has the potential to be the largest prison strike in U.S. history. People were doing hunger strikes to go along with not working. People are paid, just pennies on the dollar. The idea that such a lowly paid work in a $2 billion industry is equivalent to slavery is lent weight by the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. But isn't there something in the Constitution that says that you can't enslave people unless they're in custody in some form or fashion?
I believe so. I don't think that applies to people who are providing labor. But these people, as they're striking, they're also the prisons suffering because prisoners run the prison.
Generally speaking, yeah.
If you're on strike, there's no food, there's no laundry.
But wouldn't the system have to kick in and do something to provide a basic level of sustenance and so forth, even though the prisoners are generally doing those things? I realize that they're just going to make packouts and people are going to cross the line. But I just want, at some point in time, you could theoretically hit the point where enough people have striked for so long that they have to call in outside resources, or do they just start going in there and throwing smoke grenades and pepper spray in there to get people to comply?
They would probably do some of both. It would depend on the state and their mentality of the prison administration. You'd have a hard nose. You'd have some more reasonable, but you'd call in outside resources to provide the minimum you have to provide, which would be some kind of rations, like what they call those MREs that they hand out to.
Yes, MREs. They are not fun.
I mean, I suppose they could do that, but the prisoners would suffer, because if I'm a warden And I put myself in the position of, I'm trying to think like a warden. This is not me, but I'm thinking like a warden. If I'm a warden, I'm going to go down my list of everything that's a privilege and what's a right. And I'm going to take every single privilege away from you.
Right.
I'm going to lock the institution down, and I'm going to take every privilege away from you and provide you only what I have to provide you, and probably go into the gray area on that. If I'm a warden,
Right.
that's going to be the way I'm wired, because that's what we do. We get compliance, and compliance is to make you suffer until you come around to seeing things in the error of your ways. And I suspect that the prison administration will take a very dim view of these protests, and they will probably retaliate.
Do you know, I'm still kind of a little confused about something called Unicor. But I'm reading, there's another article from Vox that goes along with this, that Unicor bringing jobs home, investing in America. Is Unicor something specifically of prison industries?
I think it's a component of the federal system, but I don't know enough to talk intelligently about it. But I think they make products for the Federal Bureau of Prisons.
They make them for, or the people in prison
The
are
people
making
it? Make the products, and I think they do supply the Bureau of Prisons with a lot of what they need that they would otherwise. But I don't know if they go outside the Bureau with their products. Let's take a quick look.
I have heard that people in these industries, sometimes they make Kevlar vests. There is stuff in this article where they are doing not necessarily telemarketing, but they are doing customer service calls. There's a whole bunch of jobs that they do that they are interacting with the normal civilian sector, and you would never know. They make mattresses, perhaps, but I think there are things here that they then sell those products where people are being paid pennies on the dollar, 20 cents an hour, maybe up to $1 an hour, and those are going out to actual commercial entities.
Well, I just Googled it, and it says that they had revenue of $498 million in 2016, and they have 10,896 employees in 2016, and made a net income of $44 million, which is a 10% bottom line on revenue, which is not a bad return. But it says it's been around since 1934, for 84 years. It's wholly owned a United States government corporation, operated as prison labor for inmates.
Okay.
So it's received well-appropriated funds from Congress.
That means they're earning their wages by having the civilian sector pay for them, correct?
Yeah, it says as of 2016, Unicor operates 66 factory operations with 52 federal prisons nationwide, offering more than 100 products and services in 80 federal supply classifications and areas including clothing, textiles, electronics, fleet management, vehicular components, industrial products, office furniture, recycling activities, and services related to data entry. See, all those things that the prison would need. But I don't know if they go outside the prison with their products. I don't know enough about it. But all those are things that the prison system would need.
So then let's move on, and we'll talk about the kick in the nuts here. Inmates who volunteered to fight California's largest fires denied access to jobs on release. California is perfectly happy to get people that do the firefighting stuff while they're incarcerated, but then when they get out, they try and go get a job doing the same thing, and they go, "Oh, you have a conviction, so we can't hire you." That I don't
see anything. What's illogical about that? You could put a person on the fire line when you're trying to save property, and then when there's no crisis, they don't need to be on the fire line. You need people who've actually been good boys and girls. What the hell's your problem with that? You're just a liberal do-gooder.
But yeah, I get your sarcasm, but I can't. If they were willing to do it when they were in, effectively not being paid, and just doing it like you were just describing, that they do it to get outside of the walls. Maybe they interact with some civilians, which I think they keep all that segregated too, because there would be the potential to pass some contraband around. Because, you're out there fighting a fire, sleeping in a fire tent overnight in case the fire turns in the wrong direction. Someone's going to hand you a cell phone. Like, that's your worry. The guy's out there risking his life to try and help people save their $500,000 homes. And all I can say is that's a dick move.
It would appear that way. They're not dangerous when there's a crisis, but they're too dangerous to employ in a regular job setting. I love it.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, that would be either a cognitive dissonance or just a complete hypocrisy. That's the word I'm looking for. It's hypocrisy.
Yep.
So, moving on to go ahead.
Yeah, I can possibly consider occupational debarment when there's a reason for it, but that one, the article did not identify, at least didn't read it thorough enough. If I did, the reason for the debarment.
I think it's fair if you've embezzled from your company that you would have some sort of restriction over working in that capacity in the future. I think that's fair. If you're convicted of a sex crime against minors, I think it's fair to say that you should not work in some kind of daycare type setting, school. I think that's fair.
I think, like I say, if there's a reason for the occupational debarment, there would, but I can't. Fighting fires is particular wildland fires. Now you got the urban firefighter where you're going into people's homes and saving children. But if you're the firefighting apparatuses are different when you're fighting wildfires. Those are not the urban people. I'm not thinking of what the reason for the debarment would be.
And this is from I don't even, we get these a lot from this particular source, and I don't know if it's law.com, if this is the daily report, but anyway, if you want the show notes. This is from Sally Yates, the former attorney. I thought she was the attorney general, not just deputy attorney general. Didn't she get assigned to be?
She was acting briefly as attorney general,
okay.
I think, from the transition between Obama and Trump.
So just by being acting and never officially, you still hold your previous title of deputy?
Yeah, she was. When the transition took place, the government has to run. So lots of times you have people that are holdovers because the attorney general went with Obama when he left, but someone has to run the DOJ until if everybody hasn't been confirmed. So I think she was acting as attorney general until she expressed it. She expressed.
I was just going to ask you this.
Yes, over the
travel ban, right? Travel ban,
yeah. And when she said it had constitutional issues, she no longer was acting as attorney general. They let her go.
Right. And so this is Yates says broad coalition aims to break over-incarceration cycle despite Trump shifts. The byline is then the former deputy attorney general said the Trump administration has largely abandoned reforms such as literacy classes that she made to the federal prison system, but reformers across the ideological spectrum are at work in the states.
Well, and I was wanting to combine this with another article that I failed to drop in, and that was the article that came out this week about the Senate leadership. Now, folks who don't follow politics, the Congress is under Republican control right now. The majority party decides what legislation moves, the chairs of the committees, and if something is going to be considered. And the bipartisan justice reform has been killed again and stalled because of the 2018 elections, which is the same thing that happened in 2016. There was legislation moving, and they decided to stall it once the candidate for president on the Republican side said that he was going to be the law and order president. Well, the same thing has happened again. The House has passed some reform, but the Senate has yet to act, and they have decided at the leadership level that the Senate will not take these reforms up until after the election. Now there's a commitment being made by Senator Grassley, who's the chair of the Judiciary Committee, that he will bring this bill forward after the November elections, after the midterms, because right now the leadership on the Republican side believes this is too volatile and they're going to look too soft on crime if they adopt this. So we're going to get a vote we're being promised after the election. But Yates is saying that somehow or another we're going to break the logjam over this incarceration nation that we have. And regardless of whether Trump gets on board, we're going to get it done. I hope she's right. But I'm appealing to the people who wear the Republican Party registration to call your leadership. If you live in Iowa, call Grassley and tell him he's wrong. If you live in Texas, call Senator Cornyn and tell him he's wrong, and tell him you want to see this legislation move and to break the logjam. The Democrats can't break the logjam. They don't have the majority. They can't. Right. They can't force the committee to move anything. They can't bring anything to the floor. We have to have Republican support to do this, and the government's under unified.
Can't filibuster or do anything.
Yeah. So as I've said so many times before, the majority of our audience tends to be conservative. So this is the time for you to get the people who you identify most closely with to do the right thing. Because I can do no more on my side. Dick Durbin has already said he's inclined to support it if it can get to the floor. I can do no more. We need Republican support now.
Yeah. Well, so there you go. There's that. Ready to be a part of Registry Matters? Get links at registrymatters.co. If you need to be all discreet about it, contact them by email registrymatterscast@gmail.com. You can call or text a ransom message to 747-227-4477. Want to support Registry Matters on a monthly basis? Head to patreon.com/Registry Matters. Not ready to become a patron? Give a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Or tell your buddies at your treatment class about the podcast. We want to send out a big heartfelt support for those on the registry. Keep fighting. Without you, we can't succeed. You make it possible. And then I'm pretty sure you dropped this article in there also. This is from the Sacramento Bee. California could lead the way on criminal justice reform. First, the legislature must do away with cash bail. And we were just talking about this a minute ago. What's the problem with cash bail?
Well, if you're a bail bondsman, no problem whatsoever. But doing away with it, I have some mixed feelings about it, because it's like everything. If you get into it, there's pros and cons. We talked about technology on an episode about GPS monitoring and technology being used
and
to
the failures behind it,
and the overuse of it, and people who normally would have just been out reporting monthly to a pretrial service worker, if at all, would be on a cash bail. Now they have all these extensive requirements. Well, I'm afraid that the same thing's going to happen when we do away with cash bail. I believe what we're going to replace it with, and I have great problems with it. I have tremendous problems with it, because being affluent enough to post a bond does not make you less of a threat to the community. But on the other hand, you're supposed to be presumed innocent. So we're supposed to put the minimum amount of restraint on you to assure that you participate in the process. That's the primary focus of decision making and releases. Can we get this person back when trial comes? And then additional considerations reflect the community, the safety. If the person is going to continue to engage in criminality, that's a consideration. But if we do away with cash bail, which states are doing, mine included, we run the risk that we're going to have everybody under GPS and all this extensive supervision when they're technically presumed innocent. And that gives me trouble. But that's the doing away with cash bail is problematic. The case just came down from the 11th Circuit out of your state of Georgia, I believe out of the city of Calhoun, with the municipal court requiring preset cash bail. And the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, the United States Circuit Court of Appeals, said that there's no problem with cash bail. And I didn't read the opinion extensively, but it looks like that there may be limits to what we can do away with cash bail. If the legislature does it, in my state, the bondsmen challenged it and they lost, but they said the legislature can't do away with cash bail. And the bondsmen took the constitutional amendment to court, and it was dismissed, and they had a cost assessed against them for bringing a frivolous action.
Are you in the know of an alternate system? If you are a $7 an hour employee somewhere, setting a $5 bail might be too much. But if you're Manafort and you've got a net worth of $60 million or something like that, $20 million might not be enough.
You're right, Andy, and that's the problem with this. And these bail schedules, these preset bail schedules, are so ridiculously in how they've invented them. I had a prosecutor tell me, I shouldn't mention his name, but I asked a prosecutor, I said, what the hell did your schedule, how the hell did you come up with this? He says, well, Judge so-and-so did that. I said, well, what did he do it on? He says, well, he looked at the maximum fine that could be imposed on each conviction, and he set the bond for that. So if you got 2 counts with a maximum fine of $2,500 each, then the bond was $5,000. I said, well, that's a great system, isn't it? So a person who is very affluent can squander $5,000. They get to go out and roam the countryside, and a person who works at $7.25 an hour and probably has difficulty coming up with the $500 fee plus the collateral, because bondsmen require collateral for bonds. They don't just go in and take their chances unless it's a small one. Well, those people get to languish in jail as if they were convicted. That's not a fair system either. So what do we do?
Do you know what they may do in other countries that don't have this whole incarceration problem that we do?
I don't know in terms of, but I hear that they do more what we're trying to get, which is more pretrial cashless conditions of release. But my fear is that the industrial complex will make that so profitable that those costs will be. You don't have to pay the $500 bondsman, but you have to pay for the GPS monitoring. Well, as a condition of your pretrial release, we're going to require that you be on GPS. Oh, well, how much is that? Oh, well, that's $75 a week. Oh, well, let's see, that's
right.
Doesn't take long to you, and then you have to report to a pretrial services worker and miss work and all. And they make pretrial release almost as if you've been convicted. It's almost like a form of probation, and I'm troubled by that. You're presumed innocent, I thought.
Do you remember, I'm pretty sure I have this right, do you remember a French prime minister named Nicolas Sarkozy?
Sure do. He hasn't been that long out of office.
A decade or so? And
I don't think that long.
Okay. And I recall some shenanigans and I don't, that doesn't really relate to what I'm saying, but as I recall, the French, you can't do the whole perp walk of having pictures taken. They keep the media out of the whole process to give you a better chance at presumed innocent. If everything shows up in the media, well, God, you wouldn't have ended up being accused. You wouldn't have been under suspicion, nothing like that, had you not done something wrong. So you're going in day zero. You're going in presumed to some level of guilt.
Absolutely. The perp walk is one of the things that we need to outlaw, but the cops love it too much because they're pandering. And police, I hate to tell you this, but that's what you're doing. When you do this, when you go out and you call a press conference, and sometimes they don't call a press conference, they just alert the press, but sometimes they call a full press conference. But when you do this, you're intending to humiliate, and you're trying to manipulate the public opinion, and you're trying to make sure that person doesn't have a shot at a fair trial, so you're going to win your case. That's wrong. How can you live with yourself doing that? Of course, I know how you live with yourself because you don't care about due process and fairness, those of you who do that. It's wrong, and it shouldn't happen in the United States. And Sarkozy was in office until May of 2012, so he's been out about 6 years.
Okay. And he got accused of some sexual misconduct and some other things, if I'm not mistaken. Some indecent liberties with a maid in New York, I think. Do I have that right?
I think I remember that, yes.
And, presumed innocent. It feels like some other countries are doing somewhat of a better job on this subject than we are.
Well, a lot of countries do a lot better jobs on a lot of things than we do. But if you say that, you're anti-American. You remember somebody told us to leave early on in the podcast.
They did.
And I thought when you wanted to make your country better, that was showing you how much you love your country. The president says he wants to make things better, and so do I. We just have a difference of opinion about what makes things better. But somehow or another, we don't love America, and we're pointing out that we are lagging behind the world in so many things. Infant mortality. We lead the world in bad list, and we're down on list, way down on the good list. The education is really plundered in terms of America's leadership. There's so many things that we're not doing well in this country. And when you talk about it, that doesn't mean you're anti-American. You want a better America.
Right. The IndianaLawyer.com article talks about sex offender registration is mandatory collateral consequence. And it's a pretty short article. And, we have something else that's going to even go over this in a little bit more detail later. But as I recall, it says, in particular, he said he would have had to admit the underlying facts supporting the requirement as part of his plea agreement in order to be placed on the registry. We've talked about that kind of subject before, where while you're going through your treatment class, that you have to do some statement that's saying you're guilty, even though maybe you aren't guilty, or maybe you're not as guilty as they're claiming. And here you go. After you've gotten out, you've done your time. Maybe you're still on paper, but you've done your time. And now you have to go through mandatory treatment. And the treatment provider requires you to say, yes, I did the wrong thing. I put my thing here, whatever.
Well, in this case, and I didn't read the decision, but I did read the story. And what it's about is that he has this strange notion that I happen to agree with, but as far as many people consider it strange, we call this a sex offender registry. He didn't commit a sex offense. He pleaded guilty to criminal confinement.
Okay.
And it was the age of the victim that triggered the duty to register. And a lot of states have that in their code. If you can go in and rob the subway and have no intention to have sex, But if you confine the teenagers that are working at the subway in the cooler, of course, you're trying to make a clean getaway, and you lock them up so they won't be able to report you, which I'm not condoning locking them up in the cooler or anything like that. But that's hardly a sexually motivated crime. But that'll put you on the sex offender registry in some states. So his issue was that he didn't commit a sexual offense. But in Indiana, they have that on the list, depending on the age of the person that was confined. And he pled guilty. And he said, well, in the plea agreement, the age wasn't mentioned, but everybody knew the age of the person that he confined. And the court said, too bad, so sad. The legislature put that on the list, and that's not for us to decide what the list should be. It's for the elected officials to decide what the list should be. The list includes you, and you shall register. That's what the court said.
Just like that woman in Virginia that didn't report. So here she goes. She has to go to some treatment class and report that she is a sex offender. Hi, I'm Jane. I'm a sex offender. I've been sober for, 12 months now. I haven't not reported my kid having sex. I mean, what is she supposed to admit guilt to? Or, some sort of statement of criminal conduct?
I guess you would just say that I was a derelict parent. But they'd probably want her to say that she was perving and sneaking and opening the door and watching something. I don't know.
Yeah, she was watching her kid. Wow, that's there's a movie from back in the 80s, maybe called Taboo. That's kind of like that. I don't know anything about that. I'm just saying.
So, that issue was about the list, and the legislature made the list, and the court said, we're not. Well, I mean, this would be legislating from the bench if we were to decide that. If you don't want that on the list, you need to go back and get the legislature to take it off the list.
Yes.
And those who believe in conservative jurisprudence, that would be the kind of court you would like, because you don't want the judges legislating their will from the bench, do you?
No, we totally don't want the Roby people to do anything other than interpret.
And they interpret it, and they say it's on the list, and by golly, he'll have to register until the list changes.
Well, the second to last article before we go through this long court decision is from The Guardian, and hundreds dead, no one charged, the uphill battle against the Los Angeles police killing. Tell us about this one, Larry.
Well, I put it in here because it gives me a chance to pontificate about the citizens and the police, but the real purpose of it was to draw attention to the huge number of citizens that are killed across this country at the hands of law enforcement, and how nonchalant we are about it. It's like I believe the count was 374 in the article.
And you don't happen to know offhand how many were killed in Canada, do you?
I don't, but I can assure you it's far less, because they don't. The British and Canadians don't heavily arm their cops. They don't use that as their primary means of controlling a situation. From 2010 to 2014, police in LA County shot 375 people, about one person every 5 days. Black residents make up 9% of the population, but represent 24% of the deaths. And since 2000, there have been no charges for more than 1,500 shootings by police in the county. No charges for more than 1,500 shootings. That's shocking to me.
Yeah.
I see the videos of some of these, and I can't believe. And of course, they do charge. On the one in the hotel in Vegas, he was charged, but the jury refused to convict him. They said that the guy crawled in with his panties on, with his skivvies, that he posed a threat to the officer when he was face down, and the officer had legitimate fear for his safety, so therefore he shot the guy.
Just poking around. Number of fatal shootings by U.S. police in 2017 set to exceed 1,000. That's from the globalnews.ca. Yes. I'm sure that's fake news media.
And the number of police shot is usually in the dozens. It's like the odds are a whole lot more of you getting killed by the police than the police getting killed.
Yes.
And it's like the general reaction, which drives me up the wall, is like the 11-year-old girl that we talked about got tased last week. People say you should just comply. The guy in the hotel was complying. He was on his face, crawling, begging for his life.
Yes.
And some of these people get shot for doing nothing. It's like but America tolerates it. We for some reason, this should be appalling, and it would be appalling in European countries if this were happening. Of course, that's why it doesn't happen. That's why they don't have this appalled because they don't have to be appalled because they don't have the police shooting their citizens like we have.
It's very sad. I've brought this up to someone that I have lunch with on a regular basis, and I asked him specifically. I was talking about the this month, maybe 6 weeks ago, where the skinny black kid, he was at a Waffle House. This was maybe in North Carolina, Tennessee, something like that. He had taken his sister to her prom, like junior high school prom or something like that. And he gets into an argument with the Waffle House staff. So they call the cops. And some Goliath, 7 foot tall, 350-pound behemoth of a human comes and
he was only
is dealing with a kid.
He was only 6'10". Now let's don't exaggerate.
Oh, my bad. And I mean, he's almost got the kid in like a Darth Vader chokehold, lifting him up against the building. And so the guy's, well, why didn't he comply? And I understand you probably should comply, but it shouldn't be. I don't. The consequences of it should not be Judge Dredd. You shouldn't just die. You shouldn't end up with a cop's knee in your back, face down in the dirt. It just seems very heavy-handed the way that we do this.
It is, and it's going to continue to be that way until we say enough is enough. And I applaud the lawyers that are bringing cases for wrongful death and getting millions of dollars from the taxpayers. And when the taxpayers finally get tired of paying the millions of dollars, perhaps maybe they will demand change. That's what has begun to happen in Albuquerque here, because we've paid out so much money. And finally, the Department of Justice, under the liberal do-good president, came in and investigated and found we had a pattern of excessive force. And we're under a consent agreement to revamp our use of force policies. And believe it or not, the use of force has dropped precipitously. Once you don't tolerate it, it stops. When you tolerate tasing 11-year-old girls in the back, it will continue to happen. When you don't tolerate it, it'll stop. It's just that simple. There's some things that are very complicated. Police brutality will stop when we demand that it stop.
To change subjects just a little bit, I just learned that John McCain died.
I knew when they discontinued treatment, they said yesterday that he had a very limited amount of time, which means that there will be an appointment made by Governor, I believe his name is Ducey, in Arizona, and he will serve until the next general election, which at this late cycle, I think it's too late for him to get on the general election ballot. The states have cutoff dates for general election ballot. Okay. It may be too late, so he may have a full 2 years before the next general election before that appointed person has to face the voters. So
2020 would be when that individual.
Well, possibly 2018. I don't know Arizona law, but it's very late in the game here. We're 60 days, a little more than 60 days from a general election, and it may be too late to put a person on the ballot. In all likelihood,
and not just one person. I mean, it would be people that would try and step up and run, right?
Right, but in this late stage, normally they'll let the party apparatuses name somebody, so the Republican Party would be able to name somebody. But assuming they could gear their machinery up, which usually goes through the state central committee, which takes some time to assemble. Then their machinery, it has to get on the ballot. The ballots have to be produced by the Secretary of State and distributed to all the counties. And it seems like to me it's awful late in the process for all that machinery to take place and put a person on the ballot as the Republican nominee. So I suspect that appointment will, and the Democratic Party would have to do the same thing because they weren't planning on an opening. So you'd have to have two party apparatuses figure out how to get a candidate, and all that stuff would have to take place in a compact period of 60 days. So I suspect that person will be appointed and they'll serve until 2020, till the next general election.
He seemed to be a pretty honorable dude.
Well, now that we have this news coming during the podcast, I can pontificate a little bit. I admire John McCain.
Yeah.
John McCain served with great honor in the military. He was held prisoner. Mm-hmm. He declined an opportunity to be released because of his father's rank of admiral, and he stayed in the Hanoi prison for 5+ years. And he was an independent thinker, more conservative than I am on many issues, but he didn't just walk lockstep with the party. And it's a great loss to have John McCain pass away. And it's unfortunate.
Well, you hear some of these. Who's the guy that was doing the election counting thing? Not Christie. It's somewhere in the Midwest. Somebody got appointed by Trump to do the election fraud commission, and then they just disbanded it.
Yes.
Anyway, and I'm just saying, like, I've never heard him say anything just completely out in the wind somewhere of just conspiratorial or just nutty kind of thought processes. He just always, you find he's conservative. I don't particularly care if, as long as you can like back it up and have some sort of rational conversation around it. It just seems that there are a whole bunch of very strange thinking people that end up. Devin Nunes is one of the people. I just can't figure out where they're coming from.
Well, with McCain, he followed his predecessor was Barry Goldwater, who was much of the same mold. For older people that remember Barry Goldwater, he had an independent streak, and even when it was not popular, he affirmed that sexual orientation should not be thought about in the military. He said, "I'm not worried about whether they're straight." He said, "I'm worried about whether they can shoot straight." And,
that seems to be more important.
So McCain followed that Goldwater model, and it's unfortunate that he's taken the criticism that he's taken from the president. It's beneath the dignity, in my opinion, to say what has been said about him, and it's a great loss. And I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, me too. And let's move on. You dropped this on me last night, and I didn't do what you call a me read. So here's my understanding of this. This is out of Illinois, and this was from the appellate court. And there's an individual named Devin Kochevar, which is a unique name on its own. And he started dating a girl. Not dating. He knew of a girl, I think, when he was 15 and she was 12 or whatever. They're in the same school together. They're doing sports together. And they eventually moved from just a friendship kind of relationship into something of a sexual nature. And I think even the first time that they did it, he's a senior in high school, but he's 18 years old, and he has sex with a 15-year-old. And as far as everything I read, no one claims anything as far as, it's not a rape kind of charge. It was no coercion. It was nothing outside of puppy love, so to speak, just springtime love in the air. And I'm asking you all these things so you can correct if I have the story right, that then some officers show up at school and I guess they ask him to come down to the police station to fill out a statement of what's going on. The two detectives, police officers that come to the school are people that even coached him in sports years earlier. So kind of a friend of the family, or at least, there's some kind of relationship there. And they have him fill out his statement. And you brought it to me, and we're explaining that. So he fills out a statement saying that, yeah, I did these things. Maybe it was wrong, but I didn't do anything illegal. And they came back to him a couple times and had him amend his statement. And I'm going to let you pick up from there. Did I get close, though?
You did a pretty good job on that. I put the case in here because it's an appellate level decision from Illinois, and Illinois has some tough registry requirements, and they've had some unfortunate bad outcomes on litigation challenging it. This is a good outcome on litigation, and I read the case and took an interest in it because of all the different things that were wrapped up in this case that we can talk about. And I think he was actually like 17 when he started seeing this 14-year-old girl, and then they became sexually involved, and he had sex with her a number of times, according to the statement that he wrote.
I think it was 20 or 30.
Yeah, it was a number of times, and but the parents reported it, and the defendant Kochevar, he argued for suppression of his statement, and the parents reported it. The small town of Prophetstown, I don't know the population, but with a name like that, it's not going to be a huge town, I can tell you. Prophetstown. And I better not say anything derogatory because I really don't know anything about the town, but it seems like it would be a small town. Why don't you Google it and find out what the population of Prophetstown is? But the way it described the police chief coming out, the police chief only in small towns investigates things personally. They went to the high school and they took the young man to the police station, unhandcuffed, and had a discussion with him about the report that had come into to them about the sexual activity, which was reported by the girl's parents. And he freely admitted that he had engaged in a relationship that became romantic, and that he cared about the girl. And he wrote a statement for the police at their request, and they kind of more than requested. They said, you have to give us a statement. And he wrote a statement, and then he appended to it a couple more times after the assumption made by the court was that it wasn't quite what they were looking for. So therefore, they encouraged him to write more, and he wrote a more complete statement, and then they indicted him, charged him with the crime, and he went to trial. He sought suppression of that statement, of that confession, and he lost that suppression.
Under what grounds?
Well, it was not a coerced confession. You have the right to incriminate yourself. That's why they say you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. That's why they give you that admonishment. Can and will be used against you. And when they say you've got a right to remain silent, what people should say is, "You've told me enough. I'm remaining silent." You just told me I had. Yes, he was properly Mirandized, and he acknowledged that.
Okay, but I mean, it seemed like in the document that he wasn't presented that upon his initial interaction with the police. He may have done that when he got into the interrogation room, whatever the room would be where he did this. But they came to the school, and I don't know that it didn't sound like he was being brought into custody, so to speak.
Yes, he was Mirandized at the police station, but
okay.
he was given his Miranda rights, and he chose to talk. He chose to give a statement
because he's not doing anything like illegal. Like you know what I'm saying?
That's what we're headed with this. He thought that a consensual romantic relationship in the home of the free, land of the free, and home of the brave. He thought that he was not doing anything wrong. And he thought that the police, he grew up being taught that the police were your friend and they're there to help and you respect the badge and they're the good guys. And so he thought he was having an informal chat with the police, and which is typical of the police. If you don't have any experience with the police, almost everyone is gonna do that, because if you grow up in America, and more commonly if you grow up in more prosperous and more conservative and more white America, you're going to be taught great reverence for the police. You don't get that same teaching if you grow up in the less prosperous places where kids are having to compete and fend for themselves, and there's interaction with the police that are less positive. You're told to be more cautious about the police, and you're not told to assume that they're your friend and they're always there to help. But an average person growing up in middle class America is not going to get that lesson. And he thought that he was in the hands of a friend. These officers had coached him in Little League, and so
wouldn't that make up a case for them to recuse themselves from being the person that would go there?
Why would that do that? Their job's to be the police.
But because as soon as you have some kind of personal dealings, I mean, that's when you go sit on a jury. That's the one of the things that they're going to use to disqualify you from sitting on a jury. So wouldn't being the person that's investigating also have some sort of bent on that influencing you? And in this case, it's kind of a different type of influence that they can have an air of being a friend. Hey, we're not trying to roast you, so you can be friends with us.
Well, that's what he argued in his suppression motion, and it didn't work at the trial court level, and it didn't work at the appellate court level.
I personally find these things, I think it's incredibly rational and reasonable to think that these people had a level of trust there with this individual, and it tarnishes their objectivity in getting this statement from him.
Well, I have no doubt that it played a significant role in his willingness to talk, but the courts have guidance on what constitutes coercion, and what that you want confessions where they used rubber hoses back in the day. You don't want those confessions coming in because you can torture someone to confess to anything.
Right.
But American jurisprudence is not designed around what people do of their own free will. This guy was 18 years old. He was an above average student, multi-sport athlete. He understood the English language. He was not being whipped and chained. He wasn't even being handcuffed. He was having a conversation which he freely engaged in, and he was not savvy enough to know what the consequences were going to be. The justice system doesn't protect you from that. It protects you from the whips and chains and the hoses.
But come on, Larry. I can throw all kinds of crazy computer concepts at you, and you will understand the words. But you don't understand the ramifications of my words.
I agree with you, but that's not where jurisprudence is.
But that's exactly what this is. They say, hey, do you know that you have a right to remain silent? If you've never considered what this means, what this whole process means, yeah, sure, you have the right to remain silent. I can, but why would I? They don't know, people generally speaking, they do not know that these things are absolutely life-threatening. They have a massive life impact.
But jurisprudence has not evolved to protect people from unwise decisions. I mean, you can advocate for that, and I somewhat agree with you, but that's not where we are. You don't want runaway courts changing the rules constantly because of a bunch of damn liberal do-gooders sitting on a podcast saying that a person who's of normal intelligence doesn't understand what the right to remain silent is, and he signs a document that says, I do understand it, and I choose to talk. I mean, that doesn't sell very well to the average person out there. He knew what he was doing as far as the standards that are used. He was of sound mind enough to make the decision to talk, and he talked.
And I don't know in this process how much of 18 he was, but if you roll the clock back, I'm just going to make the assumption that this all came about 2 days after he turned 18. If he was 2 days earlier, he is no more intelligent, no more savvy or anything like that. But now they can't do anything because he's still a minor. Well,
the rules would change. You'd supposed to have a parent there that would be a guardian in that interrogation. But he was. I get your point.
It's not like he's any more. He's 2 days older, but a number has incremented to the point that he can now go get killed in war.
Okay, but the police already feel like their hands are tied, and they're already arguing that Miranda should be completely weakened. The Supreme Court has weakened Miranda. They have, in a couple of terms in the last 4 or 5 years, they've already weakened Miranda. It used to, once you invoked your right to remain silent, that was it. But now the police, and I can't cite the name of the case, but they said that they can continue to come back and ask you again and again and again. And Justice Kagan, I believe it was, said that spins the right to remain silent on its head, because you have to speak in order to continue to assert your right to remain silent. And she said, I don't understand the logic of this, because you have to continue to speak in order to assert a right that you have.
Right. And as I've seen in TV shows, hey, look, I want my lawyer. I'm exercising my Fifth Amendment. That's the end of it. And the police don't come back in the room until your lawyer shows up. And now they can say, hey, are you ready to talk yet? And they can starve you out and not give you bathroom breaks and water and so forth until you're a little bit more compliant.
Well, I would hope that doesn't happen, but I hear too many reports that it does. That would be a technique that would be highly questionable if I were on the defense side of that, and the person had been interrogated for 14 hours without food. I would argue that they were under duress. That would be very unwise police practice to do that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because we hear reports of it. But it would be foolish to do that.
There was a line in there that says, once the state has made a prima facie showing that the statement was voluntary, the burden shifts to the defendant. What does that mean?
Prima facie. Well, they showed that it happened. It was a threshold showing that it happened, and then once they met the burden of showing that he did do the confession, then the burden shifted to him. And he didn't meet his burden. He was competent to make the confession.
Yeah. And, but you have 16s running around, 16-year-olds who are functionally capable of 30-year-old decisions, but you also have 25-year-olds running around that are not capable of adult decisions too. Just this number that we fabricated.
Well, we've gone off on a tangent different than what I had visualized. I wanted to illustrate the difficulty in setting aside a confession.
Okay.
And you're illustrating that point to some degree, because if under all the best showing that he made about the police pretended to be his friend, and that they had been his coach, and all the stuff that he said, I just turned 18. If you can't set that confession aside, can you imagine confessions when people say, well, why don't you file a motion? Well, because they're never granted. And oftentimes when you file the motion and you lose, the deal offer goes sour because then you don't have any more ammunition in your arsenal because the state already knows that you just lost a big part of your ammo because there's no longer uncertainty how the judge is going to rule. You now know that the confession comes in. Now, in this case, the state didn't need the confession because the girl showed up and she testified and she was believable. And the girl testified, so the court took that into consideration. They said the confession wasn't the material deciding factor in terms of his guilt. There was not enough evidence even without the confession if it had been set aside. But I wanted to talk about how difficult it is to set aside a confession. You better keep your mouth shut when the police come to see you. When they say you have a right to remain silent, that's all you need to hear. You say, look, you've told me enough.
Tell me this. If you are having just a conversation with the police and not we haven't triggered anything investigatory, if that's the right way to pronounce that. That is still something of evidence that the cop is now witness to you saying something, even though it's not directly as part of the case going on. And I say that in contrast to when they actually say you have the right to remain silent.
You are correct, and that's a astute observation on your part because stuff that you're dumb enough to admit to the police unsolicited, they can use. And the right to remain silent is not. People all the time, they say, well, he arrested me and he took me to jail and he didn't have to, but it wasn't going to question you. It's a right against self-incrimination. If the cops have all the evidence they need and they come out and say, Andy, come with us, and they go throw you in the can and say, have a great day, they don't have to read you a damn thing.
Yeah.
Because they're not interrogating you. It's a custodial situation where the police wish to interrogate you. Custodial doesn't have to be in a jail. It doesn't have to be at the police station. The normal standard is when a person of ordinary intelligence reasonably feels that they can't leave, then you're in custody. And so each case has to be evaluated whether you were in a custodial situation. I make the argument that if you're in your own home and there's 26 SWAT officers around you, because when they do these porn raids and stuff, they just so overreact with the massive amount of firepower, which leads to how come we have so many shootings, which we talked about in the previous segment. But they overreact. A person of average and ordinary intelligence, A, should not have to flee their home because that's your sanctuary. But B, how would you feel comfortable in walking a gauntlet of people with riot gear?
Absolutely.
So that would probably qualify as a custodial interrogation, even though you're not in the jailhouse, you're not in the police station. So the custodial status is what determines whether they have to Mirandize you if they wish to interrogate you and you're in custody. If they don't wish to interrogate you, you don't have any fear of incriminating yourself because they lock you up, slam the door, say, have fun, hope you make bond. There's no need to read you your rights.
I understand what you're saying about the direction about trying to get this thing thrown out. And you brought up, if you're under this huge amount of duress that you were coerced into it from the duress side, I would still say that, the expression would be you get more bees with honey than vinegar. You would get more people to to give a statement to potentially admit to something. If you're nice to them, you have the good cop, bad cop. Oh, hang on, Sheriff so-and-so, he's the bad guy. I'm here to help you. Do you want a cigarette? Here, do you want a soda? Here, let me get you a sandwich. Now the guy's gonna be like, oh, sweet, this guy's nice. He's gonna help me. But that should carry the same amount of weight of being a coercion than the other direction of them torturing you or somehow mistreating you.
Well, I would say that you should get on a legal team and you should make that argument. And it has seldom worked. And
how many times am I going to get kicked in the nuts?
It didn't work in this case because the intent is to prevent people from being tortured, like what we were doing over in Abu Ghraib, or however they pronounced it. Yeah, that's the intent of that. But it's presumed that a person of average intelligence knows when they say you have a right to remain silent, that actually means you have a right to remain silent. So don't say anything.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, keep your mouth shut. There's another block in there that says he had to make a statement. And I think this is something similar to, we talk about the legal term sometimes of shall. This feels similar to that he had to make a statement.
Well, that's what the police told him, and that he had to make a statement. And I don't know under what authority they would tell him he had to make a statement, because he could have told him, "Well, we can sit here till doomsday. I'm not going to make a statement." But he didn't. He didn't have any reason to tell him that, because he believed, as he was raised in his family upbringing, that the police were his friend. That's what 90% of the people teach their kids. That's why it's so shocking with our people. Most of our people have lived law-abiding lives, and when they come into this, they're so shocked that what they thought would never happen happens to them, because this stuff sounded like mumbo jumbo from bleeding hearts that were talking about police misconduct. And they don't believe how widespread and rampant this is. His parents, I'm sure, never would have believed that the police in Prophetstown would bring a charge against an upstanding citizen who was having a consensual relationship until it happened to them. They would have thought the police were overworked, understaffed, and the bad guys had all the advantages, and that this would never happen. And by the way, what's the population of Prophetstown?
It was it increased dramatically from one census to the next, if you believe in those things. It went from, you ready for this? From 2000.
Roll the drums.
Yeah. So the population in 2010 was 2,080. That's up from 2023 in the 2000 census. So it went up by 47 people.
Well, you can just read that between the lines. If the police chief is personally doing the investigation, it's not going to be a very large place. The only reason the police chief would be involved if it was a large place, if it was a very, very high profile case of something that was going to get them in the news, and then you'd see the police chief poke their head into it. But the police chief of a department with 500 officers is not going to be personally going out and making an arrest and that type of thing.
Something that struck me in there was, and this comes out of Block 31, that it talks about there's extra questions and answers that they kept coming back to them, saying, we need you to add this, or this isn't quite what we're looking for. That feels more like a leading environment where they're trying to get him to say something specific for them. Why is that problematic?
Well, it was problematic for us, but it wasn't problematic for the court. The police were wanting to get as much as they could in terms of, see, when you on the police side, you don't know if the girl is going to cooperate. It's a much better having people have second thoughts and they feel bad and they don't show up. But if you've got a confession, you've still got the leverage. So the police were getting as strong a case as they could, just in case. Of course, witnesses do die. They get run over by buses and different things happen to them. And so you have this case can go forward even if the girl vanished from the planet, as long as they had an airtight confession. In this case, she was present and she didn't need that. But in paragraph 33, is that where you said paragraph 33?
31.
31. Okay. Back to 31.
And
clearly the court picked up on that, because they said the actual nature of the fact is driven home by a series of questions and answers appearing below the signed handwritten statement. And that's what they do. They have you sign the end of the handwritten statement, and then he had an addendum to it. So the police, if you didn't want them to know that you were actually, this is advice to the police. If you get a handwritten statement and it's not quite what you need, don't do an appendage to it. Have them write another one. Give them a nice steak dinner or something, and have them write a brand new statement, so that it's not clear. Because this court picked up on the fact that he continued to be encouraged to add additional details. It didn't matter in their interpretation, but there may be other courts that might interpret it differently. So, as advice to police, make sure you have them write a brand new statement rather than do an appendage.
Now, something else that jumped out at me. First of all, let me ask you this question: what does inculpatory mean?
Well, it's the opposite of exculpatory.
All right. And the definition of those two things would be? We get criticized for using acronyms, SORNA and all that stuff. So I was hoping that we could get these terms out, because I'm looking at inculpatory and my eyes roll. Why can't people read court decisions? Is because they use this archaic language that isn't common to us lay people.
It's implying or imputing guilt, tending to incriminate.
Okay. So exculpatory evidence would be something that helps prove your innocence.
It would be mitigating. Like if the prosecutor has a duty to disclose exculpatory evidence.
Okay.
And the defense does not have the duty to disclose inculpatory evidence, but that's what it means. But I want to make sure I gave a definition from the dictionary, since I'm not authorized to practice law. So I had to look it up. Otherwise, I'm giving legal advice. I'm just reading from the dictionaries, folks. No legal advice is being given on the Registry Matters podcast.
And in paragraph 41, they say the sex offender statutory scheme is unconstitutional as it applies to this individual. I thought this was kind of an all-inclusive thing. Hey, you can be a mom in Virginia and you don't report. Now you're on the registry. This guy is actually committing what the statute says is a crime, and they say shouldn't apply to him.
They did say that, and it's going to be interesting because it's the second of a decision from the Court of Appeals, and the other one was called Tedder that came out in 2018. And I haven't read Tedder, so I can't comment on it, but I intend to.
I think they were referencing that in here.
They were referencing the decision, and they say we realize that we're going against our prior Supreme Court precedent in this state. We get that, but why I wanted this on the podcast is because they said that the Supreme Court of the United States in Smith versus Doe did not say that all forms of registration will always be constitutional. And they went through the Kennedy-Mendoza test of the factors. And the 5 factors, there's actually 7, but a couple of them are not generally deemed relevant for sex offender registration for the analysis if that scheme inflicts punishment. But they looked at the level of the crime, which was a very minor crime. This was a misdemeanor that he was convicted of. He was given, I think, 270 days in jail or something, all of it suspended but 10, and then 2 years of supervised probation.
Right.
But yet he has a lifetime of registration obligations with very harsh prohibitions in terms of what he can't do with all the disabilities restraints. Well, the Supreme Court in 2003 said that you can register people because you're not imposing any disability or restraint. You're not imposing any occupational debarments. You're not doing all these things. Well, the inverse of that is Illinois. Many states are doing all these things. So this Court of Appeals said that we realize that the higher courts in the nation and the higher court in our state has said that registration is not unconstitutional. But this registration is, and it's very punitive to this young man who's still quite young. He's in his 20s now, but very, very young fellow. And he's got a lifetime of punishment, and they found it to be cruel and unusual punishment and disproportionate. They also found a disproportionality.
So at the towards the end of it, paragraph 49, it says his status as a sex offender is thus broadcast to the world, and he faces a lifetime of employment rejection, public disdain, impairment of his employment or of parental involvement. Mm-hmm. And his discharge of parental responsibilities, curtailment of his liberty to live where he chooses and to move freely about his community, suspicion, and permanent stigma. I'm bothered by this in that they are just saying that this applies to him, but that applies to all of us.
Well, this was only a challenge before them. This was Kochevar's case.
I get
they
that.
weren't looking, right? So they can't say that this is an as applied challenge, and they're analyzing what was brought before them.
But that then at the appeals court, that then carries a certain amount of extra weight than just being a normal court decision that can be referenced later.
Absolutely, it to the extent that it withstands almost certain appeal by the state, it's very likely that the state will not lie down and take this. They will probably attempt to overturn it by filing a petition to have the state's highest court review this appellate level decision. But in the event that they didn't do that, this would be something that other attorneys could cite to. And if I were a practitioner in Illinois, I would bring a much larger action based on this decision if it should withstand scrutiny or not be challenged.
And why can't this be used in another state as evidence or whatever's the word?
Well, it can be cited as persuasive authority in other states, but it's not binding on another state. But out of state, non-jurisdictional. If you look at a table of authorities, they're cited all the time. Out of state stuff is cited, but it's not binding. The state that's looking at it can say, "Oh, it's a very nice analysis, appreciate it," but we're going to ignore it, or we take it very seriously. It was very well done. This is actually a well done analysis. This is a very, very well done analysis.
It seemed legit. I get your point about the. It seems very much that they were trying to lead him to make this statement, and then you've also brought up that they, how hard it is to get it thrown out. But I do feel that in some of the statements, he knew what he was doing was illegal. Now, he might not have understood what the implications of a punishment would be, but there were just some statements that led me to believe that he was, to some degree, aware that there may be consequences for his actions.
I don't know that I agree with you on that, because when the police come talk to you, sometimes you've not thought through, because the police they'll give you a guilt trip. Now do you really think it's right for, if you had a kid and you were a parent and you had this 18-year-old big strong jock and this girl was 15, can you see the problem with that? And then once you get the guy primed for your way of thinking, then when he writes the statement, it's much easier for him to say. But I don't know that he would have written that statement without a lot of coaching, and the court picked up on that there was some coaching taking place. But it doesn't change the fact that he knew he had the right not to do that, in their opinion, because he understood what he was doing, and he voluntarily. Folks, keep your mouth shut when the police come to see you.
And also in the analysis at the end, it says any failure of strict compliance with the numerous technical registration and notification requirements results in an automatic extension for yet another 10 years. So the guy's only going to do 2 years of probation, but he's getting saddled with this forever, never-ending reign of terror against his life, and he's only 20 years old, as you said.
Mm-hmm. It's great news. Now, if they had decided to throw out the confession, there was enough evidence to still convict him, so the conviction would still held up, and we'd still be right where we are. Your consternation is that they should have thrown out the confession, but it wouldn't have made any difference.
Oh, and I totally get that. It totally feels to me, it's like when the devil comes and knocks on your door, he can't come in. I don't know why this is the case, but I mean, anyway, you have to invite the devil in. So who do you send? You send the super duper hot chick in the skin tight dress. You're like, wow, yeah, come on in. Or you send in the super duper charismatic guy, and he's all just about, hey, why don't you let me come in? And he's super nice to you and brings you a steak dinner. You're like, sweet, come on in. Let's have some food. Now he's been invited in. To me, this feels just like that they use their friendship kind of situation and level of trust to get him to make a statement when he may have thought otherwise, given, a reasonable intelligence, as you keep saying.
Well, and the lesson to learn is what we're hoping our podcast listeners and people is when the police tell you you have the right to remain silent, that's all you need to hear. You can tell them, stop right there.
Yep.
Because I'm not saying another word.
I only have a couple other things. I would like to have you help me unpack this. So paragraph 61 says, when a legislature uses prior convictions to impose burdens that outpace the law's stated civil aims, there is room for a serious argument the ulterior purpose is to revisit past crimes, not prevent future ones.
I love that.
There's
quote.
A lot in there. It is. There's a lot in there.
Yeah, and that's the court was hinting, in my opinion, that they feel that the legislatures have used registries as a way of extending punishment. Because when legislature, like I say, it's a direct quote, when the legislature uses prior conviction to impose burdens that outpace the law's stated civil aims, there's room for a serious argument about the ulterior purpose to revisit crimes. That's exactly what SORNA does. The victims' advocates come down and say, we have the right to humiliate this person for the rest of their life, know where they are, to hound them and harass them. And the legislators say, yes, you do. They don't say, no, ma'am, actually, you don't.
And flip that over to, I know you're so against the statistics, but it says not prevent future ones. So they're admitting that it doesn't prevent anything in the future. And the statistics technically then do matter as far as this goes, as far as being a waste of effort and resources on the public policy side.
Well, but the court doesn't get to decide that.
I know that. I totally know that.
Yeah.
But their stated aims is to protect society. And it doesn't protect society, and they're doing it to further extend that you were 18 and you had sex with this 15-year-old, but now you're going to be 55 years old and you're not going to be able to get a job somewhere because when you were 18, 40 years ago, 35 years ago, you weren't having fun with a kid.
And we can't have that. You were a kid yourself.
Huh? What? No, I skipped that.
You're a kid yourself. You were a kid yourself, but we can't have that.
I kid myself.
No.
My last question.
He was a kid himself. He was a kid himself having fun.
True.
And we can't have that in America. We like to control people's lives and who they sleep with And I'm not advocating that there should be an unrestricted age of
course.
Of consent. But at some point, we need to butt out and realize that nature has intended for this to happen. And I'm not saying, so I don't need to send 100 emails about I'm advocating sex of unrestricted nature. But I just don't see a particular thing abnormal about young people that are within 3 years of their age. I mean, hello?
I know. In school together even.
Yeah, I mean, really? You've got so much government resources that you have time to monitor the sex lives of teenagers in school that they're doing consensually. Is there anything wrong with that picture?
There's a lot wrong with it. Here's my last question. We're running very, very long. Do you think that there's a racial component into this whole thing?
I think that there could have been because of the early in the first pages of the opinion, the young man, he tried to impeach the girl's testimony by saying that she really didn't want to do it, but it was motivated by race, by her parents. And that would suggest to me that his race was different than her race. And since I looked up his picture, he appears to be black. So I'm suspecting that the racial motivation was that the parents didn't. We can't have that, and that may have driven them to call the police. And then, without looking at demographics of Prophetstown, I suspect it's 99.872% white.
So mom and dad are mad at the black kid for shacking up with their daughter, so they call the cops on him, basically.
That's a possibility. Like I said, I'm reading between the lines of he wouldn't have brought that up to impeach her, because clearly somebody was the accuser. She wouldn't have been black alleging racism by white. So I mean, to me, since he looks like he's dark skinned, that he was saying that her parents were motivated not by the fact there was something wrong with it, but by the fact that they had a distaste for the interracial relationship. And that does happen even today in the United States of America. People have problems with interracial relationships.
Yes, they do, because you can't cross the streams, as they said in Ghostbusters. If you remember that movie back in the day,
I have heard of it.
You can't have the darkies messing with the whiteys.
I have heard of that. I don't buy into it. At one time, I could rationalize what they were saying, because the kids, as I was growing up, and remember I'm older than dirt, the kids that were interracial did get a lot of harassment, and I just felt it wasn't fair for a child not having any choice to be brought into all this.
So the demographics of that particular town is 95.9% white.
Oh, well, excuse me, I was off. What did I say? 99.87.
You were off by about 3-ish. So, well, that's all I got. That's really interesting. I'm really excited about the way that they worded those things at the end. That seems like something that could be latched onto by, our attorney friend there in North Carolina and so forth too, as further, feathers in the cap, whatever ammunition that the registry is
widely disseminate
problematic.
This and try to have a conference call with the legal team if I can get them on, and then we'll talk more. Gundy next week, because we've run out of time. But we'll talk about that next episode.
Well, one other thing before we close out, I'm trying a new way of recording this, so let me know how it sounds. I don't think you're going to hear anything different, but from your side, Larry, you never dropped as far as I know.
That's fantastic. Awesome. And how do people contact us, Andy, if they would like to do all the things we want them to do, which is to sign up and get it direct rather than going through all these extraneous steps to get the podcast? What do people do?
Use your podcast app and search for Registry Matters. If you want to get an email notification and you want to get it off of the web, then you can go to registrymatters.co. And there's an email subscribe right there. You'll get a notification when I release it. If you want to get it early by a day or so, you can become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Registry Matters. If you want to shoot us an email message, you can drop that off at registrymatterscast@gmail.com. And as Gary he left voicemail at 747-227-4477.
And
that's all I got, man.
I would like to give a shout to the person that sent the private message. I do intend to contact you in the coming days. I'm just swamped, but I do intend to contact that person about
the lady that I forwarded you the email about.
Yes.
Okay. Nancy, was that? Is that the name? I don't want to drag this on. I'm pretty sure that's what I remember
Yes,
being.
but
Very
I'm
good.
intending to follow. All right.
Have a good night, Larry. I'll talk to you soon. And thank you for joining me as always.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.